You know, we're almost a decade out from the first Avengers movie, and it feels like some fans are still obsessed with a hypothetically, supposedly impending moment when the Disney Corporation will somehow destroy the Marvel Cinematic Universe by imposing some kind of sinister corporate mandate upon its creative spirit. I, myself, am given to wonder why firing one of their top talents and maybe blowing up one of the best franchises because internet Nazis pretended to be mad at old tweets because they didn't like his politics doesn't qualify as exactly that, or why they aren't more worried about what a global monopoly with a convince everyone to stay psychologically 10 years old forever and appoint itself world babysitter emperor for life business model will do to literally everything else, but I guess we should have worried about that a few decades beforehand. The fact is, unraveling whether or not Disney has or will ever take a Mickey-shaped wrecking ball to the House of Ideas, or if Marvel itself has now in fact become a wrecking ball for the Mouse House to smash through whatever boundaries of pop culture remained unclaimed to it before, is probably too dense an undertaking. That said, imagine the following scenario. Let's say the Disney company were to launch one of their company brand persona pop stars, a la Hannah Montana or the Cheetah Girls or whatever such things are called these days, but this time branding the fictional stage persona a music-themed superheroine, whom they then not only ordered Marvel Editorial to insert into the mainstream continuity of the Marvel Comics universe during a major storyline, but also did so with the ultimate plan of launching her with a movie of her own, one that would take place in the MCU, feature the Avengers and Spider-Man as supporting characters, and be a rock musical featuring cameos by the biggest stars in pop music, TV, comedy, and establish the pop star heroine canonically as one of, if not the, most powerful superheroes in the Marvel cosmology. You think fandom would be okay with that? Well, so far as anyone knows, that is not anyone at Disney's current plan for the post-Avengers 4 MCU. Because, believe it or not, way back around 1979, almost exactly that was Marvel Comics' own original plan for what would have been the first live-action Marvel movie, and it came closer to happening than most fans ever knew. This is the story of the DAZZLER.
Comics are weird, and also movies.
Alright, so devout X-Men fans are likely familiar with Alison Blair, aka DAZZLER, a mutant with the interesting power to convert sound into light and energy beams, which she incorporates into her performances and her civilian identity as a pop singer. Originally appearing as a disco star, she hopped around the continuity for decades to varying degrees of prominence, but few fans originally knew that such a quixotic character was created and given such a strong push to begin with because of a genuinely bizarre and bafflingly massive multimedia scheme that was happening behind the scenes. So goes the story, which for the record you can read a more detailed accounting of on former Marvel editor Jim Shooter's website. Marvel had entered into a business partnership with then cash-flush Casablanca Records, which was riding the cresting mainstream wave of the disco craze to big success and had just bought interest in a movie studio. The thinking being, this disco aesthetic is basically conquering the cultural landscape right now. Our entire comic book thing is weird outsiders wearing ridiculous flashy costumes, mostly living in New York. We should team up. Now, a brief but necessary digression here. Modern popular culture remembers the disco moment and its subsequent crack-up as a kind of weird fever dream, but the whole sweep of it was much more about a point where this specific music and dance genre came to be identified as the symbolic nexus point for a very rapid push into the cultural mainstream of aesthetic elements borrowed from gay and black urban metropolitan subcultures that crashed hard against a backlash supercharged by the confluence of the AIDS crisis and economic downturn and the rise of Reaganism and the moral majority. We mostly remember the disco sucks blowback now as a culture collectively getting tired of tacky clothes and the cheesy mainstream side of the disco genre because it's easier than accepting the ensuing decade's cultural complicity in the homophobia, racism, and bordering on genocidal callous disregard of the HIV epidemic that were in reality inextricably bound to the general rightward tilt of late 70s, early 80s pop paradigm, but that's another show. In any case, the before part of that, where disco was taking over the world, was the context where, hey, let's gamble our futures on a disco superhero made sense for both Marvel and Casablanca. This was the plan, apparently crystallized under the VP of Business Affairs at Marvel, Alice Donenfeld. A team of Marvel creatives, including John Romita Jr. and Tom DeFalco, would craft a new superheroine who was also a musician, the Disco Dazzler. Casablanca would then contract a model actress-singer who bore a resemblance to the character to record singles and albums under the Disco Dazzler persona and then go on tour in character, maintaining the fiction a la Miley Cyrus as Hannah Montana that she actually was Alison Blair from the comics, with the eventual goal being a starring role as herself in a Disco Dazzler TV special that Casablanca eventually got so enthusiastic about that it ballooned into a feature film proposal, by which point she was simply called Dazzler. The film's original treatment, aka hypothetical summary of screenplay to be written, was drafted by Jim Shooter himself based on the scope and scale of what the companies both wanted and thought they could get together, both in terms of size and hoped for celebrity cast, and can be read on Jim Shooter's website. It is really something, a huge-scale sci-fi fantasy epic that drops Spider-Man, a then-current Avengers lineup, and Dazzler into a hybrid Star Wars, Wizard of Oz, Dungeons & Dragons mashup that includes an entire supporting cast set to be played by popular music and comedy stars doing fantasy takeoffs on their real-life personas. I cannot stress this enough, this is the movie they described to themselves as the ideal version of what they wanted to make. In the story, Dazzler, along with Spider-Man and the Avengers, here meaning Iron Man, Scarlet Witch, Witch, the Falcon, Beast, and the Wasp, would have been transported from the Marvel Universe in New York City to a post-apocalyptic alternate future version where the city is divided into the warring states of Lower Hatton, ruled by Cher as the Witch Queen, and Upper Hatton, ruled by Donna Summer as the Queen of Fire, each of whom end up capturing about half of the displaced heroes. Additionally, the Witch Queen commands her own standing army, the Dread Knights, set to have been played by the rock band Kiss, wearing and with superpowers based on their stage costumes. That would be Demon, Starchild, Space Ace, and the Cat, if you're not... moving on. While the Queen of Fire would have her own army in the Stompers, played by the Village People, also with costumes and powers based on their stage personas, which I imagine is a little more self-explanatory. Dazzler, meanwhile, spends much of the film being safely escorted through the war-torn wasteland by Tristan, a handsome stranger whom Marvel and Casablanca had aimed to cast with Robin Williams. See, there's this prophecy that the Witch Queen and Queen of Fire can only be defeated by a prophesized Sun Queen who will arrive with her own knights and end the war. Apparently, the prophecy also says that Tristan, once again Robin Williams, circa 1979, is fated to fall in love with the Sun Queen, and because he's fallen for Dazzler at first sight, yes, this is going exactly where you think it is, she must be the Sun Queen, and Spidey and the Avengers must be her knights to counter Kiss and the Village People. I will take this opportunity to remind you all that this is 100% a real thing, that they were going to spend quite a bit of money on, that Dazzler's entire power set is turning loud noises into fireworks, and that cocaine is a hell of a drug. Oh, also, the prophecy is actually bullshit. See, there was supposed to be these three evil demonic lawyers, all played by Rodney Dangerfield, named Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Yeah. And they've caused the whole war by manipulating Tristan into using his irresistible powers of seduction, yeah, to turn both the Witch Queen and Fire Queen against one another, and now Dazzler against both of them. Why? Because they're actually the trifurcated human form of a cosmic evil god named Lord Chaos, and he needs to cause a sufficiently large war to power himself up and gain his true form. So all of this is supposed to end in a giant war between, once again, Spider-Man, the Avengers, Kiss, and the Village People, with an unnamed performer to be cast later fighting Cher and Donna Summer in an adjacent location using sound-based beam weapons that only ends once Tristan feels guilty, reveals the truth to Dazzler, and she basically does a kumbaya version of Dark Phoenix, Spirit Bomb, whatever you think happens at the end of Evangelion, on everybody and brings magic laser light show peace to the land. Everyone goes back home. The end. No, really, that's how they were going to end this.
What?
So yeah, they didn't make that movie. But believe it or not, it wasn't because anyone involved ever looked at all that and said, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea. Or, hey, maybe this is the worst idea, like, that anyone ever had. Ever. In the end, it mostly came down to the same circumstance that made it possible to set something like that in motion being difficult to maintain in motion. For one thing, it was unclear that the guy who ran Casablanca, who was in failing health at the time as well, actually had the follow-through to back up his bluster. For another, the rapidly changing arc of the disco trend and its subsequent breakdown made it harder to get a fixed sense of what Dazzler should be as a character. Some of John Romita's original designs imagined an African-American heroine based on Grace Jones, and, well, don't pretend you wouldn't have a good idea of why corporate voices went in another direction. The eventual actress choice they did zero in on as the movie replaced the album and live tour as primary focus was, incredibly, Bo Derek, who was considered the biggest sex symbol on the planet in the wake of the Dudley Moore Vehicle 10 in 1979, and believe it or not, this might have been the ultimate reason the movie never happened. See, the reason Derek's big moment in 10 didn't translate into megastardom after that is that she remained committed to pitching her brand as a package deal with then-husband John Derek. If you wanted her in your movie, she wanted him to direct it, and John Derek was a famously difficult-to-work-with Hollywood dilettante whose behavior, and the fact that his movies were all just terrible, effectively derailed both of their careers, with Marvel and Casablanca's Dazzler movie being only one of the high-profile films she never made as a result. They finished off with Ghosts Can't Do It in 1989, a failed comedy today only remembered because it co-starred Donald Trump as himself, which will theoretically be hilarious again someday. But how close did they get on Dazzler? According to Jim Shooter, this stack of Marvel comics in John Derek's hand on this People cover was his research during the deal-making, and Dazzler was drawn to more or less resemble a disco star Bo Derek when she made her big debut in XMen during the Dark Phoenix saga, of all places. Though by the time Derek was interested, the studio was rewriting the script to be less bizarre than they'd planned, and it finally all fell apart. Though there was briefly talk of reviving it in the 80s with Daryl Hannah starring, and that didn't actually happen either. I don't really have an ending or summary on this one, guys. It's, they almost did that. All of that almost happened. What else could I add? I don't think I could add anything, really. Nothing. But man, imagine how different the world of superhero film might have been. I'm Bob, and that's The Big Picture.